I am back with the illustrious Karen Hurd. Thank you for coming back. You're our favorite biochemist. And today we're going to talk about the distinctive differences of adrenaline, cortisol, how they affect our bodies, what we should know about them. So first, welcome back. It's good to be with you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Even when I say the difference between adrenaline and cortisol, what would you first say is the conflation? What's the confusion? How do people see these as the same when they're very different?
I think they see them as the same because if you ever have your hormones tested for the adrenal hormones, they're made in the same gland, but they're made in different places in the gland. Most people don't know that, and they have different functions. But they all the time confuse one for the other, but they have very specific differences and different functions.
So let's start right there. Let's just some bullet points. What are the functions of adrenaline?
Adrenaline is your fight and flight hormone. It is the one that's released when you're scared, when you're nervous, when you're busy, when you're running, anything that requires more epinephrine and norepinephrine. They're very powerful hormones that give the strength to your muscles to be able to lift, something that you normally couldn't lift. You've heard the stories before, like, a mother, trying to protect her baby can do incredible things that no one ever could do. Actually, one happened when I was living in Granite City, Illinois, and there was a mother who left her child, not wise, in her running car, ran into the Quick Trip or convenience gas store to purchase something. Car unlocked, car running, her child in a car seat in the back. She comes out, a man is getting in her car to steal the car. And so it was winter time and she didn't have her chains. And a lot of times we put chains on our car out here because the snow is so bad and you have to put chains on the car. And she caught the guy getting in the car. And so she's fighting the guy, okay, and he's getting in the car. She's pulling him out because she's going to protect her baby that's in the back seat in the car seat. And so she grabs those tire chains that were in her, under her, right in the floorboards where she was they were pushed back so she obviously could drive. And she knew those tire chains were there and she beat that guy to a pulp with the tire chain to protect her baby.
That was the adrenaline.
It's the adrenaline. And, you've heard, stories you could lift the car off of a child or, it's the adrenaline. Adrenaline, these two hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine, are what make up adrenaline. They give the muscles incredible strength. I mean, they're giving them the glycogen it's a certain fuel that is needed to let those muscles just do something they never could have done before. So
yeah, my dear friend who edits this podcast, he recently got in a car accident and his ankle was fractured. And for, I don't even know how long it was, it might have been 20, 30 minutes. He was walking, didn't even feel anything. And then suddenly when the adrenaline came down and he went into more of a rest place and he felt his body again, all this pain came, he couldn't walk anymore. So that's another example too.
Yes. Now, and this is a good point you bring up. That was actually corticosteroids. That was your cortisol that caused he didn't feel the pain because it reduced the inflammation. But that's released at the same time as adrenaline. So I'm glad you brought that up. The adrenaline, it gives you the strength, okay? Cortisol doesn't give you strength to the muscles, okay? The adrenaline's giving strength to the muscle, but the adrenaline's doing something else. It's actually giving you the ability to think really, really fast, super fast. I mean, we're talking about in milliseconds, in nanoseconds, that you can come up with thoughts, and then it's provided the energy and the neurotransmitter, this is adrenaline, to be able to carry out the reaction that you need. Throw the brakes on, because a car pulls out in front of you or a deer jumps in front of you or, while you're driving or whatever the situation is, when you feel threatened or something has to happen, that is adrenaline's causing you to think very fast. And it is released, but it's immediately in your brain acting as a neurotransmitter, making you think, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this. And you are able to do it. So that's all adrenaline. Now, the cortisol, on the other hand, it's made in a different place in the same gland. The adrenaline is actually made in what's called the medulla. It's the middle portion of the adrenal glands. And the very outlying tissues of the adrenal gland is where we make the cortisol. And that is a hormone that specifically reduces inflammation. And it will be released, like in your friend's case on the ankle that, he broke and that he's walking on it for a time. He has the adrenaline to wherever he had to walk to get to whatever help he needed, or you've heard about those type of stories before.
Yeah.
But the cortisol is released concurrently, and maybe that's some of the confusion that happens. Louise, that we think that they're the same. The cortisol is released at the same time in those emergency situations to reduce any inflammation. So it reduced the inflammation, and so that it didn't swell up. The inflammation causes a pressing on the nerves, which send a message to your brain, you're in pain. And so that's why people that are in fights, they don't feel any pain, even though you got slugged, or, they don't feel that until later. And then when all the inflammation comes in, and then that inflammation is what's creating the pain. So
Fascinating. And I'm always, whenever I speak with you or learn with you, I'm always seeing through the lens that I work in, which is a lot of trauma and stress recovery, right, with people with PTSD and such. And so when I hear this, when you're saying when you feel threatened, this response takes over, it's what we call the trauma response or the stress response or the adrenal response, threat response, whatever you want to call it. Biologically, what we're talking about is the adrenals kick in, and there's all this adrenaline, and then there's cortisol. And so what's interesting about that, I love how they work together. I love how there's this kind of adrenaline gives you this superhuman strength and this ability to endure. And then the corticosteroids, the cortisol, takes away the pain that would actually give you a boundary to not be able to move. So you kind of, for a minute, go beyond your human capacity, don't you, to survive something?
It is. It's beyond your human capacity. And then it doesn't last forever. I mean, it will only last for a short time because we can only produce those hormones at that huge amount for a period of time. And then the pain will set in, because then you will have that inflammatory response and everything will hurt. And then you will recoil and you don't have the strength to go on, and you curl up and cry, and, the world comes crashing in on you.
So rewinding to what you said about maybe that's why there's confusion, because they're released simultaneously. Is that always the case? Whenever the adrenals are stimulated, is it always adrenaline and cortisol simultaneously being released?
Yes.
So when we go into the realm of nutrition, which you and I work a lot in, and we're talking about someone drinking a coffee, eating tons of sugar, skipping meals, and getting adrenalized, they're also having the cortisol simultaneously.
Right. And this is a pushback that I get all the time from people who have arthritis or, some fibromyalgia, something where they have aches and pains. And I'll say, you have to stop exercising because that's making your situation worse. And they say, no, my doctor has said that I have to exercise. And I can prove it to you, Karen. When I'm out actually walking or running, they usually do some intensive exercise, lifting weights, whatever. I don't feel any pain when I'm doing that. And so it works. And I said, that's because you're releasing cortisol at the same time you're releasing the adrenaline to give your muscles the strength to do whatever you're doing, running or, lifting weights. And I said, but what happened is you caused such a drain and a strain on the adrenal glands that have to produce those, that they can't produce them the rest of the day for you. So when you finish exercising, I always ask them, when you finish exercising and you sit down in your chair, or you're changing clothes to go to work or whatever you're doing, it takes about a half an hour, isn't it? And then all your pain's back. Yeah. How did you know that? I said, because you stop producing the large amount of cortisol that is released in tandem when you release the adrenaline and to do the exercise.
So one thing with that is, what's a situation where someone is exercising and they're not having that issue? Is it just someone that isn't in inflammation?
When they're not having that issue, it means that the adrenal glands are keeping up with it. That their adrenal glands are strong. Like
Got it.
Me, I don't have any aches and pains. I assume you don't have any aches and pains. And so if you were out doing whatever, you would be fine because your adrenal glands are up to the job there. But when you constantly use coffee, sugar, caffeine, whatever, energy drinks, wherever the caffeine source is from, then you wear those adrenals down. So then they will not have that response anymore. They're worn to pieces. And so
that's a good distinction of people listening, because some people are going to be like, I'm not ever allowed to exercise. And I know when I worked with people who have PTSD, specifically insomnia, those were the ones I would really kind of focus in on around this. I would have them remove everything except for really light yoga and walking, and they would have this completely different response. They would start sleeping again. They would start repairing because they were coming out of adrenal fatigue. The exercise was essentially making their adrenals more exhausted because they weren't able to recover, like you're saying.
Exactly. Exactly. And so with my clients, I do the same. I allow, uh, I say always yoga or Pilates, and then just your everyday, you have to walk into your office, you have to walk around the house, and if you want to take a walk down to the mailbox, that's fine, but you're not running, you're not, doing any intensive exercise
Yeah,
while
intensive.
you're healing. And once you're healed, you're okay. Go.
Yep.
Exercise, sure, that's
Yeah.
fine.
It's nice to hear that even because it validates a situation I went through where I had this experience for many years. It actually stopped about a year or two ago, probably because the bean protocol really just it deepens, in my opinion. The longer you do it, the more it heals things. So I've been doing it for mostly 5 years now, and I would have this situation where whenever I would go exercise at a gym, like whenever I would work out or do something really high intensive, I would get ill. So you may like a day or two later, I would start having cold symptoms and I'd feel like fluish. I would think I was getting sick, but I would never get fully sick. And what I understood just from what I know in my own body is my adrenals were being pushed and they weren't being able to recover because of a baseline of stress I had been living in for years, let's say. So I just got rid of all exercise and just did really light yoga and just walked through the woods, like really pleasant, beautiful walking. And it was amazing. Now I can go and do 30, 45 minutes at the gym, like high intensity, and I have none of those symptoms anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm actually building muscle mass for the first time in my life, and my body's like in a complete repair place now instead of always being below.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And then see you, and what people do too, I have this so often that happen with clients, and I'm sure you do too, is they get well, they gave up their caffeine, they gave up their sugar, and then they think they can go back to it, and they do.
Mhm.
And then they say, well, and then they can't do that exercise anymore because they're always straining their adrenals with the caffeine and the sugar, and perfumes and fragrances are a part of this too. And it's just like, no, don't be like a dog that goes back to its own vomit, and how dogs act.
Well, this is also part of the analogy that I use when I'm teaching about stress, like quote good stress, quote bad stress. And the good stress is this kind of acute temporary experience of being inspired or having a deadline or doing something that ends, right? Whereas
Yes.
the chronic stress is just this ongoing adrenalized state that you never really come out of. And these animal bodies are designed to have short bursts of adrenaline and then recover. But when you're just stuck in that kind of chronic adrenalized state, then we have all these imbalances. I see the same thing with nutrition because for some people, they find joy and let's say liberation in rigidity, meaning they can be really devoted, like you, to a very specific practice, and the joy that comes from that is the reward. They don't ever need to go back. Whereas there are some other people that sometimes I want to have a coffee while I'm traveling, or I want to have, a candy bar on a special occasion. And that's still, I see them still recovering beautifully because it doesn't become their baseline again. And I think that this piece about baseline is very important to me. Is are the nutritional habits that cause an adrenalized body your baseline, so you're never recovering, just as are your lifestyle habits, is the PTSD, the baseline, so you never get to recover. And on that point, what I wanted to ask you is what's happening when your baseline is activated, whether it's coming from your foods that are activating your adrenals, your lifestyle, your traumatic memories. When your baseline is adrenalized and those adrenals are constantly pumping, what's happening in terms of the relationship between cortisol and fat storage and metabolism? Tell me explain that linked for me.
When you are constantly adrenalized, you're going to be in deep, deep trouble. I mean, first of all, you're going to have tendency to depression, anxiety, gaining weight. You will have pains, aches and pains. Everything hurts. Your knee hurts, your hip hurts, and then it changes. Now it's your shoulders. Now it's your wrists. It's your elbows. You're just, you have a whole laundry list of symptoms, and you go in, and your doctor checks you out, and you say, well, your blood work's normal.
Yeah.
Thyroid's fine. Your liver's
That's important. I want everyone to hear that. It happens a lot.
fine.
Yes.
Everything's fine. They'll say, I don't feel fine. Well, yeah, well then, okay, I'll get you on an antidepressant to help you not feel so low all the time. Or, you're having these panic attacks. I'll put you on an anti-anxiety med. And then we go down the road of meds, and then they still have all these problems. And then eventually they do develop into a chronic, now I have arthritis because of the continual inflammation, because you weren't able to make enough of the cortisol to lower the inflammation because your adrenals were exhausted. or now you're going through menopause. And when you go through menopause, estrogen is always in a woman is made, and men don't make estrogen at all, zero. Okay. But in a woman, they make estrogen from their ovaries. They go through menopause. They still have to make estrogen. And they will make estrogen the same place they made it prior to their menarche, which was when they were a teenager. When you're a little girls make estrogen. Little boys don't. Little girls do. And that estrogen is made where? In the adrenal glands. You go through menopause, you have to start making estrogen in the adrenal glands so you don't turn into the bearded lady at the circus. So, and you don't lose your femininity. And so it's really important that your adrenals are in good shape, because then women go through menopause and say, what's the matter with me? I'm having all these issues. And it's like, because your ovaries have given up the ghost. They're no longer producing estrogen for you. Now it's back to the adrenals, but the adrenals exhausted because you've done the caffeine, the sugar, the stressful lifestyle, the whole, everything that we've been talking about in these past lots of podcasts, all the things that we do to exhaust these adrenal glands. And then it's just like we have to rebuild the adrenal glands because they have to produce for you. It's a different type of estrogen, but that estrogen has to come from the adrenal glands.
So one thing I want to ask you, this is where I'm confused often. I understand that inflammation, fat storage, all this imbalance starts happening because there isn't enough cortisol to essentially balance what the adrenaline is creating, all this stress that's happening in the body. And that's what makes me ask the question, well, is there a certain point when you're having adrenal fatigue or ongoing adrenal stimulation that there's more adrenaline being created and not cortisol? Is there an imbalance in how much is being created, or is it just the constant creation of adrenaline is creating this impossibility for the cortisol to do anything? Like, explain that part to me.
It's an impossibility for the cortisol to do anything. And then, what we haven't brought in, when you have a large call for adrenaline, you release all hormones on a larger basis. It's not just cortisol, but it's the thyroxine, and it's also insulin. And this is we blame the cortisol problem as the fat thing. It's actually not cortisol's fault. It's there because all the ones are there. But when you're under stress, you will produce more insulin. What happens when you produce more insulin? You will convert some of that glucose into triglycerides, which are then stored upon you in adipose tissue, which are called fat cells, in the in common speak. And so then you have this gain of weight. So we say it's cortisol, but it is all hormones. And you're releasing more testosterone and estrogen. Everything's out of balance. Everything it goes crazy up. And then you have this crazy down, and now you're impotent, and now you're, you have all these problems. It's like, what did you expect? This is a full endocrine system response. Stress is a full endocrine system response.
I appreciate that word the most, because I really hope more people start categorizing trauma as an endocrine disorder, because that's really what it is. Psychology has caused us to see trauma as this kind of mental disorder. And obviously it affects your thoughts and your perception of the world for sure. But that perception and your thoughts is coming from this adrenalized system. And so it's really an endocrine disorder, because long-term adrenal stimulation creates total endocrine disruption. Exactly. And I think it's fascinating. I would see that particularly in women who were infertile, who I would work with, within 3 months of getting especially getting their insulin levels balanced and their blood glucose balanced. I should say glucose balanced, and the insulin is when, naturally balanced. The fertility came right back. These women had several kids, some of them. I mean, complete acne gone, PCOS reversed, like all these hormonal issues, menopause symptoms like non-existent, because their livers were healthier, because their liver also wasn't dealing with all these extra metabolic waste and sex and stress hormones. And so I think seeing it as an endocrine disorder is kind of like a light bulb moment, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. And I'm glad you brought up the women, because people, that you're adrenalized all the time, whether it's through your constant stress levels or if it's because of, your caffeine intake, your sugar intake, your perfumes and fragrances exposure, that is increasing the estrogen that is produced. And, women, when you have an increase of estrogen, you're going to have more menstrual cycle problems. You're going to have, because when you increase your estrogen, you also increase your progesterone that's produced from the corpus luteum once you have ovulation. And then so your progesterone level, everything is off balance. And then so you have fibroids, and you have pain at your cycles, you have endometriosis, you have heavy cycles, you have light cycles or nothing at all, because if you get too much estrogen at some point, you won't even produce. I mean, you take our female athletes, It is very common for our female athletes to have no menstrual cycle at all because they are so exhausted the ovaries during this call on the entire endocrine system. They say, I can't do it anymore.
hmm Yeah, it's interesting too, because when I think of energies of masculine, feminine, I remember this one client. Actually, there was a handful of them, but this one really sticks out where she was having issues with fertility, and she was highly adrenalized, and she went and got her blood work done, and she had high testosterone levels, and this is where you just what you were talking about with the adrenals, doing all this. And I remember her saying to me, she had this kind of realization when she got her blood test, and she said, um, seeing these high testosterone levels has made me realize I've become the man in my relationship because she was in this place of overworking, overexerting, overdoing, trying to overcompensate for something she wanted her husband to do that he wasn't able to do for whatever reason. And it was just interesting moment for me about how the sex hormones can change so much from having an adrenalized system in both sexes that it can change your even your ability to be fertile, but also how you are presenting, like having more facial hair suddenly growing or feeling more aggressive, all these things that this woman and others experienced. And then when they went into and I was thinking of this because we were saying with the female athletes, like that exertion, that push. And then once she started coming back to this more centered place, even invoking more of her feminine roles that she had pushed out for whatever reason, her body started to balance again. And then all her symptoms just vanished. And again, 3, 4 months time. So I find that fascinating. But there's something I don't want to forget to say that was very important. Adrenaline and insulin. We do not talk about that enough. And I just really want to take a moment to stretch that out because that for a lot of people listening, they're going to be like, wait, can you go back to what she said, adrenaline and insulin? So let's give them the 101, right? So you have an adrenal response to whether it's to the food you're eating or to external life circumstances, memory, something you have anxiety around, whatever it is, you have an adrenal response. One role of adrenaline is to cause the liver to give up the stored sugar. And so whenever there's an adrenal response, there's going to be a glucose rise or spike, right? Depending on how big the adrenal response is. And we know whenever there's a glucose spike, we have an insulin response. So can you just like walk us through so people can understand this, how adrenaline can create, even if you're not eating sugar, how you're having more insulin because you have more adrenaline?
Absolutely. We store a large amount of sugar in our liver for emergency purposes because sugar, and it's called glycogen, and it's not a bad thing. It is the fuel for our muscles to do their work. It is a primary fuel. It's a primary fuel for every single cell in the body. It is the preferred fuel. It's clean burning. It's fast acting. We can burn fats for a fuel, but it's not clean burning. It is not fast acting, and it causes a whole lot of health problems. So sugar is essential. If your sugar levels are falling, then we have to have those. For instance, you're starving, you're not eating. We will use that stored glycogen to keep you going because otherwise sugar is the primary fuel. And I usually just say it's the only fuel. There is a few instances where the brain will burn fat for a fuel, but it is what keeps your brain running. If your brain shuts down because it doesn't have enough sugar, then your whole body will cease to exist. Your liver will shut down. Your kidneys shut down because the brain has to send the signal to the liver to function, to the kidneys to function. And so this glycogen is highly important. When you have an adrenal release from stress, from coffee, from all the things we mentioned before, you're going to cause that liver glycogen to be released also because it is adrenaline that causes it to be released. That is the trigger to get that liver glycogen to come out. Because when your blood sugar falls, it's not like, oh, there's some hormone that says your blood sugar is low. It's another hormone. No, it's adrenaline. That is the hormone that says release liver glycogen. So then you have that. So then you'll be able to survive. So whenever you are forcing this extra production of adrenaline, you release liver glycogen, which gives the mother the ability to save her baby from whatever threat it is. But it is also then we have this insulin because your blood sugars are going to immediately spike up. Mm-hmm. And when they spike up, then your body's going to go, oh no, we're going to go into a diabetic coma because the sugars are they flood the system. And you have to have an endocrine response to that too. Because otherwise, if you go into diabetic coma, that's a fatal situation. So then you will release a large amount of insulin to slam down that sugar, but you're still producing adrenaline. So you're still, I mean, it's just like this.
Just keeps going.
It's like a whirlwind. It's like a tornado effect. You're going at a very high endocrine production rate of everything. And as fast as you're releasing that liver glycogen, the insulin is coming around and grabbing those glucose molecules that haven't already been expended in your muscle or in your brain and shoving them into a fat cell. So it's just, it's this vicious circle, and it just goes around faster and faster and faster and faster when you're in this situation.
Yeah, and there's two distinctions I think are important because I like those examples. And this is where the trauma work I do comes in, somatic work in particular, where you're teaching people how to move through stress instead of buckle down and be frozen in stress. When you think of the mother saving her child, all that glucose is freeing up to help her exert her strength. The glucose has a purpose. It's pushing toward an action. I find it interesting, and again, that's an example of a short-term kind of acute moment of being adrenalized, right? That's what it's used for.
Yeah.
When you're just stuck in that chronic state of being adrenalized, whether it's mental stress or food stress or environmental stress, perfume, whatever it is that's causing it, but it's chronic, that glucose isn't being used the same way. I think it's a very important piece to bring in. It's just it's like sitting back snacking essentially, even though you're not eating. Can you just add a little bit to that?
Yes, because if you don't have a foe to fight, you don't have a race to win, you don't have your whatever speech to get through, whatever it is, creating this short burst of adrenaline, and you're just sitting at the office, on your computer doing your job, that glucose is not needed, but it was released, and then it is all converted by that insulin. It's not used, so it's converted into a fat.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating for people to understand because there have been, before I understood this part of the biochemistry, like maybe 15 years ago or so, and I'd be working with a client, there would be this very specific correlation. I found it mostly with women who had some kind of sexual assault in particular, but it can be anything. But it was that demographic is really what I found. After the sexual assault, there was this 15, 20 pounds of weight gain that just wouldn't go away. And it wasn't even from snacking. They weren't having any kind of binging disorder. None of that was showing up. And all I could think of there was like an emotional, intuitive way I worked with it, where your body's trying to protect you, which is what it was doing. But the biochemistry it was trying to protect you and it never stopped trying to protect you. So you stayed in this adrenalized state from this attack that you couldn't escape. And then by doing so, you stayed in this high insulin state, which then fat storage state. So everything these women were eating, even like healthy, normal meals, were being stored as fat because so much insulin was in their system already. And I think that's just an interesting thing for people to consider when they're having weight issues or fat storage or inability to lose fat, and they're not thinking about the stress, they're just thinking about dieting alone.
Yeah, that is excellent. And that you were right on. And I want to add something here because I want men to see how this is affecting them too. I made a statement a little bit ago that I said men don't produce estrogen at all. I want to walk that back a little bit. Men don't have an endocrine gland to produce estrogen. Women do. We produce testosterone and estrogen. Actually, estrogen comes from testosterone. Well, we produce the testosterone first. We have an endocrine gland to do that. Men don't. However, fat, those adipose tissues, fat cells, will release a certain amount of estrogen in a male.
Mm-hmm. What's that called? Aromatized? What's the term for that?
Yeah, aromatized.
Aromatized, yeah.
Yeah.
Tell them about that. Tell them about how fat cells aromatize testosterone. It's really great.
It's a chemical reaction that happens. And when you have a fat cell, you will produce, it's a low level estrogen. We have several forms of estrogen, but it's still an estrogen. And your fat will go through, estrogen is made out of fat. And because we have different chemical reactions happening always, this is happening at this adipose tissue, the fat cell, and those fat cells will actually produce this low-level estrogen in men, even though they're not adrenal glands. Men don't normally, if an overweight man can be producing low-level amounts of estrogen, which will affect how he feels. Mm-hmm. Because that is affecting his masculinity, because estrogen is not something that's supposed to be circulating in a man's bloodstream. So I wanted to clarify that because of my previous statement.
I was going to touch on that at one point, but you did beautifully. And what I was going to touch on is those men that I have worked with, the ones you're talking about, these men will experience erectile dysfunction, infertility, low libido, low motivation, depression, like all these things start emerging because essentially they're coming out of their natural rhythm. Their bodies are not supposed to have estrogen, and now it's happening because of this quote glitch, let's say, in the nervous system response, or even the chemicals in food or the diet, like whatever the situation is, fragrances. There's so many reasons why we would store fat and then it would aromatize. But I think it's interesting because when these men would start losing weight, especially, men that have belly fat, it's usually a correlation between erectile dysfunction and belly fat. Once the belly fat started coming down, and so literally these centers that were making estrogen were dissolving, they were going away. And then their testosterone levels would start coming back up and they would feel much more centered and secure in themselves. And as important as that is for mental health, they also additionally were able to become fertile again, their libidos returned, their motivation returned, and their mental health improved.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Brilliant. Um, Gosh, I feel so satiated already. I'm trying to think, is there anything that I left out that you want to add that people should really know as we're talking about cortisol and adrenaline?
Yes. One more thing. We have to learn to be content because you can give up your sugar, you can give up your caffeine, you can give up your perfumes and fragrances, all the things that cause those adrenal stressors. And that will help you to become more content where you are. And you have to eat your beans. I mean, we've talked about that on several segments before, so that we can get rid of those recirculating hormones. But we all have to come, and you have done this. You're a beautiful example of this. You really are. That you mentally have to, we talked about this psychological portion and we've been talking about the physiological portion. But I know some people that are very, very healthy that are my clients and they have done all the right things, but they're still they just get, whatever it is, it bothers them and gets them under their skin. Just take the burrs out from underneath your saddle and don't let this bother you. I mean, I'm in a job that is a high pressure job and I can let a whole lot of things that are said and done really bother me. It doesn't bother me. I don't let it bother me because in the long run, it doesn't matter. As long as I'm healthy, I'm okay, you know? And
That's
so,
a very important piece. I mean, that's really the crux of my work is holding the two things we're talking about in this episode. The biology, so your body's response to environment, food, and situation. There's that part. And then the psychology, your personal perception of yourself and others, how you respond to a situation. Those two are, to me, when I think of a diet, I think of those two because of what you just said. I have also worked with people. I've been the person in my history where the diet is perfect and rigid and everything on paper is working. And the results aren't coming because the perception, the way you see the world, the way you see yourself is so stress ridden that it's just like we're talking here. The perception and the mentality is creating so much adrenaline, so much insulin response, storing so much fat, even though the diet isn't. And so, even though when you're still having a lot of stress or you're thinking in a stressful way or living in a stressful way, and let's say the diet is not stress inducing, well, at least it's one thing you can check off the list. Okay, my diet, my food isn't inducing the stress response, which is a great start for most people. But then if you're still having the stress response, even though the food isn't inducing it, that's when you know, okay, lifestyle has to change, perception has to change, my purpose in life, whatever it is, something has to shift because the mentality isn't connecting to the biology in the way that's balanced.
well,
That's
you're right.
that's an important piece.
Yep.
What were you going to say?
I was going to say, Luis, you're doing a wonderful job. I mean, I just love that you're out there and you're working on both aspects of this. So keep on. Meet thousands and thousands of you.
Thank you, my love. I appreciate that. And I just want to say publicly, thank you so much for you were such a great mentor when I was writing chapter 9 of my upcoming book that will come out April 2026, because I wanted to really capture in this chapter the connection between soluble fiber and stress, essentially stress reduction, and lack of soluble fiber and stress, increase. And I really wanted to capture that. And so I did my best all by myself, and I felt like I need Karen. So I sent you a slew of emails. You were so detailed, so concise. Karen would not take a penny. I tried so hard to pay you for your time. So I just want to thank you because you really helped make that chapter legitimate because of all your studies and your training and your clout. So I feel so grateful for that. Thank you.
I'm glad to help you because, Luis, you're helping all the others through your book, through your practice. Like I said, I love what you're doing. We just need thousands of you out there practicing because, as you know, you can't reach the entire population.
Nope, and I won't. It won't happen. But I am content with where I'm at. So there's that word again.
And me too. I am content with the ones that I can reach and very content to help you in all of your work.
Thank you, my friend.
Yes.
And just as we close, I want everyone to know when they go to your website, KarenHurd.com, especially those of you thinking, oh my gosh, I want to dive into this. Like the women that are thinking, I really want to do fertility stuff. Or the men or women who are thinking, oh, I really want to get balanced. I just want to start this bean work. How do I begin this? You have so many courses on your website that are very affordable. And when you buy them, you not only have them for life, but you get to reach out and email and ask questions to get some input from you. Is there anything you would add to that about any upcoming courses or anything about that they should know?
No, there's 17 courses out there. I've got 2 of them in the makings, but my attention's been diverted temporarily. I have another job that I do too.
What are the 2 in the making, just so we can, a little cliffhanger?
Neurological disorders and cancer.
And cancer?
And cancer.
I'll look very forward to that. I'm the first one, the neurological ones, because the work I do. Very cool. Well, thank you for your time. As always, you're so easy and fun to talk to. And I know we just helped a lot of people make a distinct connection and understanding between the adrenals, adrenaline, cortisol, fat storage, all these things.
Thank you, Luis.
Thank you for watching today's episode. Please like and subscribe if you found it useful. And let me know in the comments what you want me to cover next. I have developed a 4-week self-paced course that takes 18 years of my personal and professional experience and puts it into one place where you can easily and quickly learn the foundations of recovering from stress and trauma. How does the food you eat affect your stress levels? How do the relationships in your life create stress or peace? How does the relationship you have with your body allow you to feel happier and more settled? I will cover all this and so much more in this 4-week self-paced course. And the best part, it's self-paced. You don't have to sign up at a certain date or finish it at a certain time. It's yours for life, and it's waiting there for you when you're ready to finish it. Throughout this course, I'll be teaching you philosophies and practices that combine my 3 favorite modalities: somatic experiencing, embodied parts work, and nutrition. For more information on this course, click on the link in my episode details.
Getting there, it was just, I could tell something special was about to happen.
There's just something about in-person retreats that just doesn't compare to online space.
Menla is outstandingly beautiful. Why not be there with Luis and his team?
My body knew that something intense was going to happen in the most beautiful way.
It was all about getting what each and every one of us needed and what the community needed.
My biggest takeaway is that I got introduced to myself.
We're just a bunch of misfits trying to find community with one another, and that's where my heart just blasted open because I felt like seen, and yeah, it was beautiful. I loved it.
Oh, and I forgot to mention something very important. I'm offering a $700 discount for anyone who registers before April 15th because this is our last US-based HLN team retreat until 2027. In 2026, we'll be doing this in Europe. So if you want to get in this year in upstate New York, in America, please visit holisticlifenavigation.com, click on events, find the retreat, and when you go to the registration page, make sure you type in the discount code HLN700. And as long as it's before April 15th, you get $700 off your entire purchase. So check the calendar right now, and if it's before April 15th, go register, enjoy the discount, and I cannot wait to see you there.